Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So feedback is greatly important. Feel free to reach out to me, and also the links for you to do so will be provided for you. All right, so some of the audio platforms I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, just to name a few. All right, so this episode is going to center around particularly folklore. And so I'm going to start out the series by talking about sirens. Let's dive in. Alright, sirens. Wow. My goodness. So many different aspects about the placement and how they're seen in culture. And, in a nutshell, pretty much what their aspects in culture is, they're beautiful women who take the form of beautiful women, but they're actually in the reality situation. I mean, there's different folklores about this. Ship shifting. Excuse me. You get in the aspects of banshees. You get in the aspects of, things like that. And pretty much their whole purpose and goal is to allure and to ultimately send the travelers to their demise. Now I started out talking about this. I was setting everything up on Substack on Saturday, giving a survey about the aspects of sea folklore. Now, excuse me. When something is as prevalent as sea life, when how vital water is to our life, how whether it be the aspects of drinking water, the aspects of cooking, the aspects of commerce, the aspects of exploring, the aspects of having fun on sea, where is it you go take your cruises, where is it you fish, recreational with the aspects of having pontoon boats where you fish, all the way up to where you fish and you have a family with you, all the way up to having yachts. Ocean, sea, water is very vital and important in society. And so when something is so valuable, is so multifaceted as water, as, the sea, as ocean life, etc., of course, folklore is going to entail into these things. Now, when you get in the aspects of sirens, it goes along, as old as the beginning of time. It gets into the concepts of perception isn't exactly reality. And there's so on top of sirens, there's so many countless examples about the aspects of how having encounters with these situations either help or hurt the individual. The Odyssey is a really good example of that. You have onset, written depictions about the aspects of sirens and how they lured and they ultimately send these men to their fate, their watery fate, their watery grave. Now, it gets me to thinking about the other aspects of how this is, it's one of those things you call the old adages, calling the kettle black, or just looking at things for what it is, and making commentary about this. So the aspects of sirens, any aspects of deception and shape-shifting, deception and reality of situation isn't what it seems. Okay, case in point here is there's a lot of biblical references to this, and think about it like this, and I'm gonna wrap up, and then I'm gonna extend out, and of course give facts about the aspects of sirens, and then extend out, and then in between, give thoughts. All right, so here we go. Now, in the divine book of divine books, the Bible, we get the aspects of Adam and Eve. Now, Adam is going by his way, but Eve sees something that's very tempting, which is an apple. Now, God warned them. He said, do not eat from the fruit, the tree of life, because if you do, you would have full knowledge of your state and the surrounding of you. And, it was a full warning that they would have great punishment within this. Now, some people see this as a factor of something that's negative and something that's, I'll see that, using it as a example, just so to speak, as to this is the reason why Christianity is not vital to the aspects of flourishment of society, which is not true at all. It's very unfortunate, that people have that sort of bent about Christianity particularly, but to each his own. But see it in this way. Now, it's one of these things to take this in consideration. Now, think about the aspects of, if truly, walking in faith and really understanding these concepts about God in itself and His ever-present Spirit. Now, the aspects of free will. Now, within itself, free will is a divine gift and a divine aspect of the beauty within accepting Christianity and being spiritual. Now, if God wasn't, merciful, but at the same time disciplined, there's one of those things you have to have that kind of common ground to understand that the aspects of making things whole, and that God in Himself is a higher being than us all. If He didn't instill the aspects of have that concept of free will, we all have that aspects of understanding something, but it's not forced upon us. And that's in its case what was going on with Adam and Eve. He's instructing them and telling them, hey, you gotta not do this, but if you do, there will be consequences for it. He could have easily said, hey, you do this, you're gonna screw up your life, and because you screw up your life, it's going to be generational pain for it. No, He didn't do that. He let them make their decision the way they did, and out of that, the consequences came from it. But there's life and learning lessons with those consequences for this. Now, getting back into that, the aspects of deception, shape-shifting, and the perception of reality isn't always true. isn't always what you think. So there's how that element of that sort of allegory, I can see that how that relates and how that is very prevalent in the aspects of sirens in itself too. So think about it like this, what I just said, translate that to sirens. Okay, their whole common goal is to what? To deceive the interpreter. And its deception can take many forms. The aspects of beauty, the aspects of song, and to be engaged with this deception, it in itself is destruction. That's something to really listen and take that with a grain of salt. Or in this case, sea salt. Alright, with all that said, I'm going to get into the factual aspects of sirens. Here we go. Alright, so here are facts, and the sources will be provided for you about sirens. So it says in Greek mythology, the origin of sirens varies across different accounts. According to some sources, the Apollonius, the god of the largest river in Greece, is the father of the sirens, while Metaponymy is their mother. Another myth suggests that the sirens were born from the blood of Apollonius after he was injured during the fight with Hercules. Forgive me for pronunciation. I know some Greek gods and goddesses, but I'm not, well versed in this, so bear with me. Alternatively, the sirens were once handmaidens of the goddess Persephone when she was abducted by Hades. Demeter transformed them into sea nymphs with the bodies of birds to assist the search for Persephone. After giving up the search, they settled on the island of Athemosius. So, hence the name siren. It's also debated. On one theory, it connects the Greek word for rope, which suggests that the sirens connects to the Greek word. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me say that again. You know how you're reading something and you read it and then you go back again? So, let's start over. So, one theory connects it to the Greek word for rope, which suggests that sirens were the ensnaring ones. Another theory proposed that pre-Greek origin is the reason for the name siren. So these mythical creatures were often depicted as having the heads or the upper bodies of women and the wings and the lower bodies of birds. Another depiction shows them with simply bird legs or even fish tails. Alright, so I think a really good example of the aspects of sirens and, the reality of the situation of what they symbolize and their personalities is, now this series was really good. It was called What We Do in the Shadows. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the original concept was from the duo from Flight of the Conchords, and it was like a movie or something. So the original concept was from them, if I'm not mistaken. The New Zealand actors, comedians, what have you. So that transition, the FX picked the show up. They wanted to make them the series, What We Do in the Shadows, and it was quite successful. And I was really surprised that the show was prevalent as it was, and it kept going, it kept making series. I got kind of, virtue signaling a little bit, but it wasn't, all abashed in your face. What I mean by that, it kept up with the ever changing times in which we're living in now, and and like any other show, it ran its course. But kudos for it, still going on in the midst of everything with COVID and all the transitions of all the different agendas surfacing in mainstream popularity and so forth. So it was really nice that the show like this was existing. So for those who don't know, the main premise of the show is that they're vampires, and they're adjusting to modern life, and they want to stick to their way of life, stick to what they know, but they're trying to live in modernity as best suited as they can. So, going back to the main point here. So, the characters, some of the main, if I'm not mistaken, two of the main characters went off and they were in pursuit of another character. And by chance, one of the characters ran into a siren. And so her personality, was essentially like any typical TikToker. Young, bubbly, empty-headed, for sure. And just a whole lot of surface level, really a lot of flash, but nothing to say. But when she started to, excuse me just a minute. But when she started to, send out her code of seduction, which is singing, he started to fall in a trance and fall in love. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the guy that, if y'all know who I'm talking about. But there's a vampire main character on the show who, he's an energy-sucking vampire. And it's very funny because he says that he gets most of his energy from people who work in the office. And that's a very clever, witty remark about the aspects of office life. So anyhow, he becomes entranced with her and he wants to build a relationship. But, when reality sits in, and both of them are aware of the situation of that's not really, it's just not well suited. And yeah. But, it's just a really good example of perception isn't always reality. And it goes on the lines of her having that sort of vernacular in her voice. It goes on to the pen marks about the aspects of, modern society. So particularly with the aspects of social media, you have all these young women, young girls, particularly young women, bubbly, happy. It's just this is da da da, and they're promoting even their influencers or whatever kind of crap. And they're promoting the idea of happiness, but it's not actually there. Or it's not actually true what they're proclaiming about the aspects of the products that they're pushing. And so that is very prevalent to have a siren, associated with things like that. Because the personification of a siren is to deceive in perception, and that is in order and the line of the aspects of people who, surface on social media. They're perceiving to be happy. They're perceiving to be attractive. They're perceiving all these things, but is that really reality? So that's quite interesting. All right, so I'm going to end with some more facts here. Here we go. Let's find this. article. All right. And so I will have this link provided for you in the source. But, also it's very informative source. And, feel free to give the creator of this, support if you like to. You can either, sign up for email notifications or so forth. But it's worth the time and energy. So the sirens of Greek mythology. So in Greek mythology, the sirens were dangerous creatures, often portrayed as part woman and part bird. They were known for their enchanting and irresistible singing voices that lured sailors to their doom. So the most well-known story featuring the sirens is found in Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. So the theme of sirens have persisted in art, literature, and popular culture, serving as a symbol of temptation and the dangers of succumbing to the allurements. So who were the sirens? So they were Greek mythology sirens, and they're pretty much depicted as, in its sense. So I'm paraphrasing what this person said. Soulful songstresses of the sea. So depicted mainly through females with a slight problem. They had the body of a bird. So their purpose is simply to lure wandering sailors into their clutches with enchanting songs. So these songs are said to bewitch the sailors, and if the tune is successfully received, that is, it will lead them into inevitable doom and a fulfilling meal for the sirens themselves. According to Homer and other Roman poets, the sirens set up camp on islands near Scylla. They also confirmed their presence to patches of rocky land called Sirmium, so Scopoli. They were also known by another name such as Antisumia. So the descriptions of their abode were most notably written down by Homer in his Odyssey. So according to him, the sirens lived on a sloping green meadow on top of a heap of bones accumulated from their unlucky victims. So in itself, trying to using allure and deception to sweep away reality. Quite interesting. All right, the siren song. So rocking the this is quite interesting what he's saying. So let me start that over again. So rocking the bumpiest of the playlist, the sirens sang songs that struck the very heart of whoever listened to them. So sirens singing lured sailors from all walks of life and was a significant catalyst for producing excess serotonin. So music was a much revered medium of expression in the ancient Greek world. It was essential for their lifestyle, much like it's known in modern times, And then I can't stress that enough. Music is very prevalent in the aspects of our lives, and particularly in modern culture. Whether you are interested in music or not, it is there in your life in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so from the Kataria to the lyre, tunes of deep harmony struck the chords of the people of ancient Greece. As a result, the siren songs were mere symbols of temptation, a temptation that affected the human psyche. So as their beautiful voices combined with enchanting music, the sirens continued to attract sailors and lead them to the end of the line. It was much like an ancient form of Spotify, except Spotify wouldn't lead you to your death or if you continue listening to it for a long time, you'll still be okay. But it is these lyrical ladies in the middle of the sea which sang enchanting tunes that radiated positivity. So how could they possibly spell doom for sailors? Sirens are no heroines in Greek stories. Sirens sing to slay. That was the simple truth of it. So, it's quite interesting with the aspects of how things also perceive and change with imagery. So, good case in point of this is, now I've said this before, but I'll relay it back to this. And, things like Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was if you really read his work, it's more notable for his little bump in the night tales. It's scary tales, not little in any way, short or fashion. I'm humoring the situation, but his body of work was more than that. And so, case in point, the aspects of ravens were seen quite differently when they were depicted and associated with Edgar Allan Poe. Ravens are these, stark demons, I guess, from hell. As their imagery, evolves throughout pop culture and throughout time. And so, in the aspects of Sirens, the imagery is changed, and the real meaning of sirens have changed in the conception throughout time too. A really good case in point of that is the aspects of how the show Sirens on Freeform, and ABC Family then Freeform. The perception of sirens was quite different. And so another really good example of this is, if you're not careful and you don't pay attention to what it's actually saying and what it's actually meant by that, is there's an episode of King of the Hill where Bobby is visiting his grandmother, and his grandmother has a boyfriend. So Bobby, excuse me. So this episode is about Bobby being in transition from being a little boy to moving on to being a teenager. And so, he shows his grandmother's boyfriend a picture of his friend Joseph and Connie, which is at the time he was dating her. And so his grandmother's boyfriend points out, "Oh, who is this little siren?" And so, if you're not careful, you think that, it's one of those things that, does he actually understand what he's saying, or is that a little backhanded compliment? So, and it's quite witty and funny at the same time, if you really break it down. So what is he actually saying? He's saying, beware, because especially when you're young, especially when you're teenaged, matters of the heart, especially young teenage girls, can have a sharp leave a sharp thorn on your skin if you're not careful. And in this case, he's pinpointing to Connie. And that's something to really, consider and think of. But on the surface level, you say, "Oh, that's a nice compliment to be associated with the siren." Is it really? All right, so let's get back, wrapping up everything here. In ancient times, naval journeys were considered one of the most challenging courses of action. So the deep sea wasn't a homely abode. It was frothing, a form of fury that could claim the lives of sleeping mariners, men of the sea, who weren't weary of their environment. And this blue hell was in the imminent danger of their surroundings. So naturally, sirens appeared in Greek myths and mythology as dangerous creatures that drew sailors into rocky shores. This explains the sudden shipwrecks and unexplained events in the deep sea. So their bloodthirsty characteristics owed to this as well. Since these shipwrecks washed ashore on uncharted territory without any explanation, the ancient Greeks and Roman writers traced them back to the sirens themselves. So how sirens looked alike. Being the prime metaphor for seduction and temptations, you might expect the average siren to look like the subjectively prettiest and most symmetry, have the best symmetries in their features. Being the fantastic female figures, enchanting the voice of divine nature, they should have been portrayed in Greek mythology as the true definition of beauty. Right? That's not right. Greek myths don't play around. The typical Greek poet and Roman writers link the sirens to inevitable death. This is reflected in the written descriptions of the sea. If you'd like to read more, this is you can in this source. It's embedded in the source. Okay, initially the sirens were portrayed as half woman, half bird hybrids. So contrary to popular belief, Homer's Odyssey does not describe the sirens' appearance. However, they were portrayed in Greek art and poetry and pottery as having the body of a bird, which is in the depiction of it's all in its glory with sharp, scaly knives. Sharp, scaly nails. And, might as well be knives. But the face of a beautiful woman. So the reasons why birds were chronically chosen to be portrayed was that they were considered to be creatures from the underworld. So birds in mythology often acted as the medium of transportation for carrying souls. So this could have derived from the Egyptian equivalent of the bowerbirds, which were soul doomed to death-defying. Let me say that again. Bowerbirds were doomed to death, fly away from their form. Their souls being taken away from them is what this is saying. And the birds will do so by taking their souls away and taking them on to the afterlife or the underworld or what have you. A bird with human face. So the idea of transitioning into Greek mythology, from which poets and writers generally continue portraying sirens, was the malevolent half-woman, half-bird entity. So, from a distance, sirens merely look like these enchanting figures. However, their appearance becomes more apparent once they lured sailors with their honey-sweet tones. During medieval times, sirens eventually became associated with mermaids, so caused by the influx of European stories making inspirations from Greek mythology. Mermaids and sirens slowly began to blend into a singular concept. Sirens and mermaids. There is a notable distinction between sirens and mermaids. Though both of them dwell at the sea and are portrayed in pop culture as being the same character, there is a stark difference between them. Sirens are known for their compelling voices that led sailors to the other side, as depicted in Homer's Odyssey. They are the harpies, I guess you can say, of death and destruction throughout seductive deception. So mermaids, on the other hand, in Greek mythology, are entirely different creatures with bodies of fish from the waist down and pretty faces. They symbolize serenity and oceanic grace. So mermaids often intermix with human beings and produce hybrid offspring. As a result, humans had a much different outlook on mermaids than they had on sirens. So in a nutshell, sirens were the symbols of depiction and death. At the same time, mermaids were easygoing, and were the epitome of marine time beauty. While mermaids longed and were the longing and wanting to be associated as a mermaid, or being thought of in the presence of a mermaid, which in itself, the aspects of being a mermaid is peace to whom set eyes on them. So sirens roped unlucky sailors into their pretentious tunes. All right, so and I'm going to end on this. So, origins of sirens. Unlike many main characters in the world of monsters, sirens don't really have a definitive background story. Their roots blossom from many branches, but some stick out. So, the Ovid's Metamorphosis, sirens are mentioned as being the daughters of, as I was mentioning earlier, Apollonius, the Greek river god. And it is written as such. But why have you, sirens, skilled in song, daughters of Apollonius, the feathers, the claws of birds, while still being human face? Is it because you were numbered among the companions when Persephone gathered the flowers of spring? So the narration is a small part of the large myth of the abduction of Persephone, the daughter of Zeus, and Demeter. Persephone. I'm sorry about that. Persephone. So this myth is relatively more popular when tracing the origins of sirens. So once again, the Metamorphosis of Ovid narrates that the sirens were once the personal attendants of Persephone herself. However, once she was abducted by Hades, because the mad lad fell in love with her, that is, the sirens were unlucky enough to witness the whole scene. So, here's where the belief gets blurred. In some accounts, it is believed that the gods have the sirens, their iconic wings, and all of that, so they could take the skies and search for their missing mistress. In others accounts of this, the sirens were cursed with avian bodies because they were deemed incapable of saving Persephone from Hades in the dark clutches. So regardless of what is believed, all accounts eventually confirm the sirens to the sea, where they nested upon flowery rocks, calling sailors to live beyond their eerie singing voices. All right, so my thoughts about the aspects of sirens. So, I think that this sums it up best, sirens in pop culture. And I'm going to read this to you. So, safe to say Homer's Odyssey had an immense impact on contemporary film and art. In this case, Sirens' early Greek art was influenced by Homer's depiction of their perceived personalities. So this showed up in the pottery and the text by other poets and authors. So the concepts of a damsel in the sea singing songs to tether man to death is appalling and on its own. So the concept has naturally been reflected in thousands of other arts and television franchises and countries to do so. It is a payday for those who are fascinated by it. So, prime examples of this. So, popular TV shows and films where sirens are shown up in some form include Disney's The Little Mermaid, Netflix Love, Death, and Robots, Tom and Jerry, and the Fast and the Fury, their freeforms Sirens. So, what is this all saying? It's saying that the aspects that there is a price to the aspects, particularly when you get into the myths and the concepts of what sirens embody. There is a price to take on the form of perceiving what reality actually is. And, like I was saying, that's why, when you get into the aspects of what is really vital to human life, of course you're going to have a lot of lore that goes with it. And it's quite interesting with the aspects of sea life. There's a lot of lessons that can be learned with being, living, dwelling, being and part of the sea. It's in a nutshell here, it really transcends reality. And so when you have figures like sirens embracing the concepts of the sea, that's another element to the mystique that the sea and then sea life and sea culture is and brings to our society. So I'd like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. So this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.